Good afternoon. Welcome back to another edition of the B&H Virtual Event Space. You are tuned into artistic expression through paper choice, choosing the right paper for a folio or exhibition with award-winning photographer Rocco Ancora, sponsored and hosted, of course, by Canson Infinity. So a huge thank you to Canson Infinity and a huge warm welcome to Rocco for joining us. Rocco, how's it going?
Yeah, very good. Very good. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's wonderful to have you on. Look, I know we're talking prints. We're doing this whole virtual thing, so a little bit gets lost. We were talking before we went live about how with printing, it's like you really have to hold the print in your hands to really appreciate the paper. But Rocco is going to do his best to convey to us why you all should be printing and paying attention to the paper that you do print on. So we're going to turn it over to him, but I do want to remind you that any questions you do have, feel free to get them in. If it's on anything regarding anything Rocco does or on printing, Canson products, we do have Mark sitting there behind the scenes to answer any questions that you might have on Canson Infinity papers as well. So feel free to get those in. But Rocco, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Well, thank you so much. As already mentioned, it's going to be a little bit difficult to appreciate, if you like, the tactile characteristics of paper, which is really what makes it beautiful. One of the most beautiful characteristics of fine art papers, especially, is the way they feel and it's the way they look. So I'm going to try my best with examples through a keynote to convey that across. But at the end of the day, hopefully by the end of today's session, we're going to start thinking about paper in a very, very different way. And rather than just think of paper as just a medium that you print on, regardless of outcomes, you'll start to understand that it is probably the most important decisions you make when we start talking about conveying a message or an emotion or a feeling. Okay, so I'm just going to start the keynote and we're going to get straight into this because we've got a bit to cover. So let's get back into this. And we're good to go. So you can see my screen now. Everything's good.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so artistic expression through paper choice. Now let's talk about printing. Now, when we talk about printing, things are a little bit different than the rest of photography because there is a certain amount of science involved in printing. Now, whether today we're printing now, of course, talking about the digital age and printing on inkjet, but even back in the days when I was working in the darkroom, there was a very, very scientific process. You know, the chemistry, the optics, and everything that came together to produce a print, but still a print that was worthy to show the world, I guess. So on the scientific aspect or the nerdy aspect of printing, which is what I love, I guess, but I love both, but the science part really intrigues me because we can achieve incredible things through the way we prepare a file, the kind of color management aspect of things, and of course the whole mechanics of printing. Now, the scientific part, believe it or not, that's the easy part because it's science, it's maths. I mean, once you have a workflow in place and you stick to it, variables aren't going to change, and you should be able to get a repeatable result each and every time. Getting back to the days that I started printing back in the dark room some 25 odd years ago, maybe even longer. Don't want to show my age, so let's just leave it at 20 odd years ago. But results were great, but they weren't necessarily repeatable. Any fluctuations in temperature would affect the result of the print. There was a lot of factors, and there was a lot of frustration that kind of came into place in producing the end result. Okay, so but the artistic side, that's the bit that you will only understand it through experience, if that makes sense. There's no manuals, there's no textbooks. It comes down to personal preferences, personal taste. It comes down to your style of work. It comes down to what you want to say with your photography. So what do I print? Well, a couple of different reasons. Let me share those with you. Number one, it completes your vision as an artist. Now, a print is final. It can't be changed by your client if you're printing commercially. I'm predominantly a wedding and portrait photographer. So just giving your files away, you tend to lose control of your vision because digital files are open for interpretation. Number one, they're open to interpretation by the common thing we all use, and that's our monitor. I mean, not everyone's got beautiful calibrated high-end monitors. So whatever you might think is great might look really bad on someone else's monitor. Number two is the fact that giving a file away, it can be changed. I mean, everybody loves to put their own Instagram filter on things, so it no longer becomes your vision. It becomes your vision with someone else's, spicing and cooking methods, if you like. Okay. A printed photograph for me is personal. Okay. And it's very emotive. When you create a print for someone, okay, you don't create it for Facebook likes, if you like. Okay, it's all the satisfaction of the masses. It is for you and your client, and that to me is a very, very powerful thing. Because when you print an image that you're proud of and you hold it in your hands and you appreciate simply for what it is, you're able to get a clearer sense of who you are and what your image is about. For me, there is something quite beautiful and nostalgic and emotive about holding and looking at a print. I mean, the same really cannot be said by looking at pixels on a computer screen. So if printed properly, prints, I guess you really get to appreciate every little nuance in your file and every little thing that you want to say with the subtleties of your image. One of the other reasons, of course, is that a printed photograph is archival if done properly. And we're going to talk about archival properties of paper and paper and ink combinations a little bit later on. But it is a great way of archiving your work. I mean, sure, I mean, the digital world, we have different sort of levels of redundancies with cloud storage, et cetera, but a print is, once it's done properly, provided you don't lose it, it's there for a very, very, very long time. So the archival aspect is extremely important. It's extremely important for the images I sell to my clients, because as a wedding and portrait photographer, you're documenting or memorializing their lives, if you like, and it's a specific important time of their lives that you're documenting, and it's generational. You want to be able, the client wants to be able to share this with the next generation and so on and so forth. So the importance of archivability is paramount. I'm not going to lie, it is a source of income. Okay, so for me, with my clients, it doesn't end at just I'll go and shoot the job and then I'll just give you some files. It is about selling prints, and the more you sell, the more income you will make. So it is a great source of income. This is an interesting one. It makes you a better photographer. Well, how does it make you a better photographer? So I guess we can become so desensitized with just looking at computer screens that sometimes, we just look at things but not really seeing what we're looking at. Okay, the minute you take a print, or you take an image from a screen onto a print, you start to look at it very, very differently. When we look at the world, okay, we look at the world in a reflective form, if you like. So light is hitting the environment that we're looking at, and it's bouncing back into our eyes. And that to us is a natural way of looking at things. When we capture it with our camera, of course, and then those images end up on a computer screen, something changes. And the way we're looking at images now, you have a screen that is backlit. So the viewing has changed from a reflective nature to a transmissive nature, okay? And that's not really natural to us. I mean, sure, we've become accustomed to it because screens are everywhere, and your phones, your iPads, and so on and so forth, but it isn't really a natural way of looking at things. And we tend to look at computer screens very differently than the way we look at the natural world. But when we print, something beautiful happens, because we go back from, we started with reflective way of viewing things, transmissive, and then we go back onto a print, back into reflective mode again. So light is hitting the print, okay, it's reflecting back into our eyes, and it becomes a natural way of looking at things. So all of a sudden, any faults or any things that just isn't quite right, you actually start to notice, because the image is scanned very, very differently by your eyes. So any shortcomings in your photography are really, really going to stick out. Okay, any shortcomings in composition, exposure, shadows, artifacting. It's really, really, depending on the paper you use, that can really, explode and really hit you right in your face. And the last but not least reason why I print, well, basically because I love creating art, okay? And I love printing. As I said earlier, printing in the darkroom had its frustration, but it was still very, very rewarding, okay? Seeing your vision come to life, because back in the film days, there was no other way of appreciating a photograph unless you shot slide film, of course, and held it up to a slide viewer or stuck it in a projector. But looking at a negative wasn't really a way of appreciating what you've captured. It didn't really come to life until it was printed. So for me, that love of bringing something to life is still very much part of who I am as a photographer and as an artist. Reasons why I print. So the printing process itself, we touched on it earlier. And these are the things that we need to pay the most respect to. Number one is file preparation. Now, today we're going to talk about paper choice, yes. But I'll tell you something, guys. If you put rubbish in, you'll get rubbish out, okay? So file preparation, doesn't matter. You can print on the most expensive paper on the planet, on the most beautiful paper in the Canson range. But at the end of the day, you will only get back what you put in, okay? So we need to, pay due diligence in file preparation, and that ghastly thing in the middle called color management, which really drives the whole thing. Now, color management can be such a boring and dry subject, but at the end of the day, it is an integral part of your workflow, being calibrated, having the right profiles. This is all part of the equation of achieving that ultimate result. And the last bit is, of course, the aesthetic consideration, which is all about choosing the right paper, but also understanding that not all papers are made equally and not all images are designed to suit the same paper all the time, okay? So the medium, paper for me is the medium via which your image is expressed, okay? So that's your final piece of the jigsaw puzzle. Now, there is a point of view out there that the paper is seen as nothing more than the foundations of a building. The foundations are essential, but not part of the beautiful aesthetic of the final architectural masterpiece. Print, at the end of the day, does what it needs to do. It expresses all that's in the file and remain invisible. But I do not agree with that. To me, and I guess to any other skilled fine art printer out there listening today, prints are real objects, okay? And they're more than that. They're beautiful art objects created to be experienced by our senses. And that's what makes them so beautiful and so unique. So asking yourself, what is the purpose of my print, is the perfect starting point when we start to think about paper, okay? If we're just printing for pleasure, purely for the art of creating something beautiful, and what happens to the print afterwards is really unimportant, then the only considerations are purely aesthetic. But more often than not, we're printing for a specific purpose, right? Such as we're printing for an album, or whether the print is to be evaluated through an award system by a judging panel, or a print that will become an object on someone's wall that's going to be passed down from generation to generation, or maybe it's a print that's going to be part of your portfolio, showcasing a particular body of work, or maybe it's going to be part of your own personal portfolio of your journey as a photographer over time, okay? And that's probably a really important aspect, because it's all about printing your legacy. With everything I do, I always print and I always store away in a beautiful archival box. Now, Canson Infinity makes these beautiful portfolio boxes. Some of these prints will never see the light of day because they're just my play prints, if you like. But I like to think of it that one day, generationally speaking, my children and the future generations will get to enjoy a little bit of what I was about as an artist as well. And that makes it, very, very important. But for all of these considerations, it comes down to paying particular attention to the physical and aesthetic characteristics, I guess, of the paper and the effect on the final result, okay? Another question we need to ask is, what do I want to convey with my print? So the visual language doesn't start and stop with, I'm taking a photo, I've captured a photo. that's great if you're just going to view it on a computer screen. But then that photo, as we discussed earlier, has to have a purpose. And we're not there always to describe or, you know, tell people what the image is about. That feeling, that mood that we're trying to come across, that has to, I should say, come across in the printed print. Okay, so the choice of paper can be artistic, but an aesthetic one as well. So printing is all about completing your vision as an artist, and different paper stocks will express your vision in a very, very different way. Now, perfect way to begin your printing journey, okay, is to get yourself, you know, like a sample pack or a discovery pack, okay? And in the discovery pack, you'll have all the different papers in a particular range. And do yourself a favor, go and print that same image, pick your favorite image and print it over and over again on different papers. And you'll be very, very surprised at the results, because different papers will behave very differently with your image, or I should say your image will behave very differently when it touches the paper and different papers, okay? Now, a couple of considerations before we get into paper choice is, number one, what size will the print be? Because that will determine the type of paper you print on. Will it be mounted? Will it be framed behind glass? And I'm going to talk about framing a little bit later on as well. And another important factor is what lighting conditions will be used to view my print. Now, this is extremely important, especially if we're exhibiting. We want to be able to know, number one, the color temperature of the light that might be falling on the particular print, but also the geometry of the light, which makes it extremely important. When I'm talking about geometry, I'm talking about the angle of light, whether it's going to be problematic and causing reflections of, say, a sheen type of paper, or whether, you know, you're printing on matte because the viewing conditions are somewhat challenging. Now, I'm not sure how this is going to translate, but you can see like something printed on this is a Baryta-based paper. You can see as the light is hitting it let me just stop sharing the screen so we'll get nice and big here. So, okay, so here we can see that the paper is quite shiny. So depending on how the light hits it, it's very hard to see through, you know, the nuances of shadow details, as opposed to a paper that's printed on matte, where it doesn't matter what angle you're viewing it on, okay, you're still able to see the nuances of shadow detail, highlight detail, midtones, and so on and so forth. Okay, so considerations in the geometry of the lighting, there's so many things to take into account. Okay, let's go back into sharing my screen. Let's get back to the presentation. Okay, hang on a sec. Okay, and we're back. Okay. So lighting conditions become a very, very important consideration. Now, when it comes down to papers, there's a lot to consider, okay, because papers come in all sorts of different properties. Okay, so beginning with color, we've got warm papers, neutral papers, we've got cool papers. Then we break that down further to surface characteristics, from textured to smooth. Even further down, we got the base material that the paper is made from, whether it's an alpha cellulose, a fiber-based paper, cotton rag. And these properties, of course, will affect archivability, which we'll talk about as well. The contrast range of the paper, different papers will exhibit a different level of contrast. Gamut, we're talking about the color, how much of it can it display? And of course, last but not least, is the sharpness. And I'll explain these in detail as we go along. I want to begin first with paper contrast. Now, paper contrast is nothing more than the difference between your black point and your paper white. When we talk about the black point, is, I guess, the blackest black that can be printed on that particular style of paper. You will hear the terminology a lot. And that's DMAX. Okay, the DMAX is the blackest black. Okay, so the greater that difference, okay, the greater the contrast. So different papers will exhibit different properties. And that goes in conjunction, the paper contrast is in conjunction with the type of surface that we print on. The surface that you choose, of course, once again, becomes subjective and personal, but matte papers lean towards a lower contrast kind of scenario. The luster or the semi-gloss, we start to get into a medium contrast type of scenario. And the gloss papers, of course, extremely high contrast, okay? Now, once again, these are all things that you need to consider. We're not here to say one's bad, one's good, always print on this, okay? So, when we look at, say, a luster paper compared to a matte, okay, as I said earlier, reflections could be problematic depending on the geometry of the lighting that is that you choose to view your print under, okay? So, and also considering, the surface and the contrast level of the paper, if you have imagine you've got a nice, beautiful, low contrast image, beautiful fog rolling over the hills, early morning light, and you've got these beautiful soft pastel tones. You kind of look at it and you go, geez, I wonder how that would look on a matte paper. And you might find that printing a low contrast image on a low contrast paper could end up being quite muddy, okay? Sometimes we need to counterbalance the lack of contrast with the contrast in the paper, just to bring out just a little bit more in the image itself, right? Rather than just accepting the fact it's a soft image, so I'll print it on soft paper, okay? And maybe that's what you want to do, and maybe that's the final look that you're trying to achieve. But be wary that matte papers on matte images can tend to look quite flat and quite uninteresting, if you like, okay? And so once again, we're using the contrast of the paper to offset, I guess, what's already in the image and accentuate what we're trying to say. So different paper surfaces will exhibit different results, okay? Gamut. Now, gamut is nothing more than the possible color range that can be printed on a paper/inkset combination, okay? And believe it or not, different papers will give you different results, okay? So I'm just going to jump into another program here called ColorThink, just to visually show you what I mean by that. So we're in ColorThink here, and those of you who are familiar with it, you'll know it's a great program. Those that aren't, it's nothing more than a program that basically gives you a visual representation of your profile, if you like. So if I turn on a profile here for the Arch88, which is a matte paper by Cans on Infinity. It's one of the newer papers, and it's a beautiful paper. What we can see here, and we compare it on the spectrum locus on the LAB and LUV. So that is how much color this paper can actually print. But if we compare this now to, let's go back into 2D, to a Baryta paper, so the new Baryta 2, okay, you'll notice that a lot more color can be printed, okay? So we're getting richer blues down here, the darker blues, we're getting richer greens, not so much in the yellows and orange, but then we start to expand through to the bigger values of as it starts to separate into the magentas and the blues. I'm not sure whether you hang on a sec.
Yeah, I don't know if we were supposed to be seeing the screen, Rocco. We don't see it.
Yeah, no, you don't see it. Okay, let me just go back.
There we go.
Yeah, that's perfect. Okay, so let's get back into it. Apologies for that. I thought we were sharing, but we're not sharing. All right, so this is the plot of just the Cans on Infinity profile for the Baryta 2. Okay, so we can see through the diagram the color that it's able to reproduce. Here with the spectrum on the spectrum locus, we can see the range of greens and the range of blues and magentas and red and so on and so forth. When we compare that to, say, sorry, that's the Arch88. When we compare it to the Baryta 2, you'll notice that a lot more color can be printed. Okay, and this is based, this profile is off the Cans on Infinity website, and for a Epson P9000 series printer. Okay, So look how much more green we can print. Look how much more in the blues we can print. So, you know, if your images, you know, beautiful landscapes with beautiful rich colors, you want a paper that's able to reproduce that, yeah? As opposed to maybe a softer paper with a softer color gamut, if you like. So different papers will yield a very different result. The brighter style papers will always tend to have, you know, larger gamut capabilities, and the matte style papers, if you like the, you know, the R88, Bragg Photographique, BFKs, color gamut is going to be slightly reduced. But once again, another property to work with. Okay, so let's get back into the presentation again. Okay. So the importance of gamut, once again, is it's one that you need to understand depending on what you're printing. Now let's talk also about the surface texture. Now surface texture, I love surface texture, depending on what I'm printing, because it can add a beautiful artistic appearance to your image. Okay. However, too much texture can interfere with the subject matter. Okay, especially if the prints are really small. Okay, slight texture though can add an element of interest. So it's a kind of a balancing act. Okay, from when we, you know, smooth papers giving you, you know, beautiful clean details, that's what we see, and then we've got textured papers that can add an element of interest, but depending on the size that we're printing. And I'll show you an example that I have here, and I hope this translates across. So this is basically a 5x7 inch print, printed on BFK, Arch BFK, pure white. Okay, you can see the subtleties are kind of lost, but we have this, I guess, this beautiful texture that's overpowering. Now, if the image was larger, then the texture will become a little bit more interesting, because it would act with the texture of the dress and so on and so forth, and maybe even the texture of the skin, because it's all relative. I mean, the scale of the texture on the paper doesn't change, even though we're printing maybe a 60 or a 40-inch print. The image gets bigger, so the details will get also bigger, but the texture then becomes a supporting actor, if you like, in the story. Okay, so that becomes the supporting rather than the dominating aspect. If you are printing small, however, and you want to print on a textured paper, I would suggest always leaving a border around the edge that's visible, because the eye sees that, and it sees that that's part of what they're looking at, and all of a sudden, not that it discounts it out, but it accepts it. The eye accepts it, and it kind of helps with the homogeneous aspect of the viewing experience, if you like. Okay, so texture, it's great, but it depends. Size, it depends on all these factors that we've discussed. Archival considerations are extremely important. Okay, now for the paper to be archival, the base must be acid-free or 100% cotton rag base. Okay, it must be free from optical brightening additives. OBAs is the abbreviation you'll hear a lot of paper manufacturers talk about. And that has to be in conjunction with the use of pigment inks as well. So the type of inks that you use on your printer are going to have an impact on the archival permanence of your image. Okay, so OBAs, there's a lot of discussion about OBAs, but they're nothing more than chemicals that are placed in the paper. In fact, OBAs are used daily in things like detergents and toothpaste, etc. All they do is they make the paper appear brighter. Okay, it's kind of a little bit of a magic trick, if you like. These fluorescing agents convert light just outside the visible spectrum into blue light. Okay, so this cools down the whites of the paper that the human eye will interpret as cool, or the whites appearing brighter than they actually are. Okay, so even if the paper is not actually reflecting any more light than normal, than non-OBA paper. So when you look at papers that have OBAs on it, okay, they will appear brighter, but they're not actually brighter. Okay, they're just giving us the illusion that they are brighter. Okay, so it's all like a magic trick, smoke and mirrors. Okay. Now, what the OBAs do over time, of course, is they leave a distinct kind of yellowing of your print. Okay. Now the OBAs accelerate the aging process, if you like. Okay, so if the paper is heavy with the OBAs, the aging process or the yellowing of the print will be accelerated over time, as say the normal aging of a print done on a paper that doesn't have OBAs. Okay, so OBAs, it's something that you need to take into considerations when you're printing and you're trying to print archival, and especially like if you're an artist and you're selling limited edition work, and of course someone buying one of the pieces, that's an investment. Okay, so you're going to need to think very carefully about the substrates and the paper that you print on, because you don't want the image degrading over time, because you want it to appreciate in value over time, of course. Okay, so OBAs. The other thing we'll look at with paper is the base color itself, okay, from cool to neutral to warm. Now, the cooler papers, we refer to those brighter papers, if you like, which are your photo luster type of papers, your premium RC papers, okay. Then we get into a neutral type of papers, and then we got the warm papers. And you can see here from the diagram, from the Vellum Museum Rag, which is one of the warmer papers in the Canson range, to the Rag Photographique, which sits around almost a neutral, to the Photo Luster Premium RC, which when you compare it by itself, when you compare it against all of these, it looks quite blue, as you can see on the screen. But when you compare it by itself, of course, it looks just like very, very bright paper. Now, mathematically, of course, we can measure these these warmness and coolness value using the LAB color model. Okay, those that aren't familiar with the LAB color model, the central axis is the brightness. Okay, and then we have the B positive axis and B negative axis. Okay, so anything with a B positive value is warm. Anything with a B minus value is cool. Anything with A negative values is more green, and A positive is more on the red magenta. Okay. So we illuminate the paper with D50 illuminant. And when the A star values and B star values equal 0, then we say that is the neutral point. Okay. Now, here in Australia, Dr. Les Walkling painstakingly has taken the exercise of measuring the LAB value of some of the Canson papers, and this is the table that he's come up with, and it's actually quite remarkable, because when you look at papers that are quite neutral, the R88 point, so that line in the center representing, a neutral tone or a 0 tone. So R88 being just in underneath that, which is, makes it a little bit brighter, I guess. And then the platine fiber rag being just a little bit warmer. So they're the neutral points, if you like. And then above that, we're getting into the warmer papers with the positive B star values. And as I said earlier, the Vellum Museum Rag being quite warm, and going right down to the really, really cool papers of the photo satins and the photo lusters. Okay, so they range in texture, of course, but they also range in warmth. And this table, I love this table because it's a good resource to go back to and look at just how warm the paper is in comparison to all the other papers, and it becomes an integral part of what we're deciding when we choose the actual paper itself. Now, with the papers, I like to classify them in two different style of papers. You've got your everyday printing or commercial-based papers. They're cost-effective, durable, easy to manage. They're your photo lusters, your photo satins, and so on. And your fine art printing papers, they're great for wall art, exhibition, competition, and archival properties. Okay. Now, when we talk about, of course, the fine art printing and choosing the right paper for fine art printing, two categories again: matte art papers, cotton base, and the Baryta style art papers, alpha cellulose and cotton white paper base. So that's a mixture. Okay. And of course, all papers are coated with an inkjet receptive layer. Two styles of papers that I love. So you got your matte art papers and Baryta style papers. Now, the Baryta style papers, they get their term from the chemical compound used to coat the surface, which is barium sulfate. And this used to be the coating for traditional silver halide premium, the traditional silver halide coating that was used in photographic conventional photographic prints, but now they've added a premium inkjet color receiving layer, which makes it great for us today. They do have the look and feel of traditional darkroom black and white fiber-based prints. Those who have printed in the darkroom know what I'm talking about. And they can, as I said earlier, produce extremely high Dmax for rich blacks, okay? So if you want punchiness, this is the way to go. Extremely wide gamut, great contrast and great sharpness, okay? One of my favorite papers is the Canson Baryta Prestige 2, which is one of the newer papers, okay? Now, when you look at the B-star value, it's 0.026, so it's an extremely neutral paper, okay? Extremely neutral paper, and it's got a beautiful smooth satin surface, beautiful enhanced contrast, and once again, that beautiful nostalgic darkroom feel. Properties of this paper, it's the fact that it's an acid-free alpha cellulose cotton rag base as well, which is great for the archival properties, okay? Now, with the Baryta style papers, they're a little bit less forgiving for image defects like noise, post-processing artifacts, over-sharpening. If your image is suffering with any of those things, they will be shown through, yeah? You will really be able to tell, okay? Type of images I love to print on this sort of paper. I print a lot of my fine art architectural work on these, especially stuff like what you see on the screen with, you know, with good contrast and good, you know, good surface definition. It's got an incredible, beautiful, smooth satin surface, and it just allows the image and the finest detail of the image just to really, really come through, okay? And once again, if there are black and whites, they do have the look and feel of the darkroom fiber-based papers that we used to print on. One of my ultimate favorites, and this is be the new favorite because it's one of the new papers, is the Baryta Photographique 2 matte. So it's a Baryta paper, but with a difference. It has a matte finish, and it is just the most beautiful paper. It is just incredible. Originally, we had cameras set up here today that were going through, and we couldn't get them to play ball today. But the colors on this paper just sit there, okay, regardless of lighting conditions. Okay, so your blacks are rich. You know, your colors are beautiful and vibrant. It is just an incredible paper. And it's one of those papers that's very hard to actually describe, because you kind of like the image just kind of, it's kind of just has a life of its own. You're able to see things through things, if that makes sense. So fine detail really, really shines through. It has an absolutely beautiful peerless surface that just accentuates, like, it's fine detail and beautiful color tones. So that is my ultimate favorite for you know, color work, high contrast color work with rich saturated colors and fine details, but also it is absolutely divine for black and whites, and the tonal gradations. It is just beautiful. And I can't stop talking enough about this, but you're really going to have to get a sample pack and try it out for yourselves. Okay, so cotton fiber papers, variety of surfaces in these style of papers, from the slightly textured, of course, the heavily textures. These are the most expensive papers, but they are the highest grade of fine art matte papers. Okay, so pure cotton rag papers, lower Dmax value than coated papers. So my favorites now are the Canson Arch 88. It is the brightest paper without OBAs out there on the market, and it is 100% cotton base, OBA free, beautiful ultra smooth surface finish, and it has a soft, supple feel. Now, the soft, supple feel is due to the fact that these papers, these new Arch papers, are cylinder mold made papers, which is more the traditional way of making papers. This adds a beautiful randomness in the fibers and the way they're arranged in the papers, which adds to the beautiful bulk and satin-like properties of the paper itself. So it is really a tactile, touchy, feely property, but it is gorgeous. Okay, pure white tone, superb color rendition, deep blacks, neutral whites. I love it for my portrait work, especially my wedding work, where I want those, you know, those whites, beautiful white dresses to really shine through, and just beautiful, gorgeous, clean colors. Both, like I said, for portraits and for weddings as well. So that's the smooth paper. But if I want a little bit more texture, my two favorites now, the Canson BFK White and the Canson Arch BFK Pure White. So both Arch papers. The difference in those is purely their level of warmness. So when you watch this presentation back, go back to the table and have a look at where they sit in the table. So the BFK White, it is a very neutral paper. And sorry, the Pure White is a very neutral paper, and the BFK White is it's got a nice, beautiful, warm base. These papers have a beautiful, beautiful texture to them. They're not overly textured, but just enough to just give you a point of interest with your prints. And I love printing my my vintage style portraits on these, whether I choose the warmer base or the cooler base, depending on what the image itself has, I guess. Images like what you see here on the screen, they were printed on the BFK, normal BFK, not the Pure White. So BFK, Arch BFK, which has the warmer base, just adding to that vintage kind of look that I was trying to achieve with these style of portraits. But the texture is an interesting thing here, because once you start printing large, and these prints here for the clients were 30 by 40 inch, so they're quite large prints. And here's a close-up of it. You can start to see on the right-hand side how the texture works with the texture of the skin. So we get this kind of beautiful homogeneous kind of relationship, and it just works so well. Okay, and of course, if I want something that's even more textured than this, the Canson Aquarelle, Arch Aquarelle, which is just a beautiful paper. The Arch Aquarelle, of course, is the aquarelle itself. The paper is recognized by watercolor artists all over the world. It is the most prestigious paper in that genre, with a history that dates back to 1492. Now we have an inkjet receptive layer on this beautiful paper that allows us to do some beautiful prints. A lot of my soft pastel landscapes, I love to print on this paper. Once again, large, of course, just accentuating that nice, beautiful watercolor feel. We're gonna talk a little bit about print size before we wrap this up, and the difference and what they mean when you're printing small as opposed to when you're printing big. Small prints for me are personal, okay? They're intimate and private. They're created for one person to view or connect at a time, okay? So the smaller the print, the more personal I think it becomes, because you think of a postcard or think of a little 6x4 and you're viewing it in your hands and someone hands it to you. There is a certain delicate nature about it, isn't there? I mean, we start to, we start to see, the print and appreciate it for the delicacy of it, or the delicate nature of it. And then as the print starts to get bigger, not only, of course, do we see, the subject matter, yes, but as a viewer, we begin to pay attention to technical elements that make up the picture, pay more attention to the visual nuances used to communicate a story, the feeling, etc. So as the print starts to get, a little bit bigger, like we're talking about 8x10, possibly 11-14, we start to look at the print and interact with the print just a little bit differently. And then, of course, large prints, large prints, 30-40, 60-40. The size and how big you print is dictated, of course, by viewing distance. It's pointless putting a really massive print if your viewing distance is nothing more than 3 feet, because you'll just not appreciate, the print for what it is. So, but large prints, when you have that beautiful viewing distance, okay, they do increase the level of visual impact, allowing the viewer to become part of the story. But printing big also, you need to pay particular attention in the quality of what you're printing, because as a viewer, you want to be able to move around the print, moving closer, moving further away. And as you're coming closer, you want to be enticed by the beautiful nuances of what you're trying to say, with beautiful shadow detail, beautiful texture, as opposed to coming closer and viewing print faults, if you know what I mean, okay? So the viewing experience is enhanced if the print is perfect. The file is perfect, and then we print it to a really large size, okay? So large prints as opposed to smaller prints. And of course, prints behind glass, like if you're printing on gloss or luster and you put it behind glass, it can cause a lot of reflectance issues and optical challenges, of course. Matte surface papers generally are better for framing behind glass or perspex. And also the geometry of lighting can have adverse effects in the viewing experience, as we discussed earlier, depending on the paper. A couple of ways to counteract that. I use a box frame where the actual print itself is set away a fair distance from the glass. So the glass doesn't become, it doesn't interfere, if you like. If you walk up close, you can see the print behind it. And of course, when we're talking about glass, we're talking about normal glass. But if you can spend the money, non-reflective glass, it is awesome, because it becomes, the glass really does become invisible regardless of the lighting. And the other way I'd like to mount my prints is using a floating mount with a torn edge. So we're seeing the print in all its glory with the paper rebates and everything else. These kind of floating mounts work really well with textured papers and non-reflective glass, because as I said, the glass becomes invisible, and then we can appreciate the texture that is part of what we're trying to say with our image. Okay, so there is a lot to think about when it comes to paper, but your journey should really begin, as I said earlier, with a discovery pack. Pick your favorite image and print it on all the different papers, and seeing how the different papers, move you, and see how the different papers interact with what you're trying to say. Do they enhance? Do they detract? These are all the important questions. But there is a lot to think about in the world of paper. So I think we'll leave it at that as far as the presentation. And I think now we've got some question time. Is that?
Yes, definitely. And I will let everybody know there's Rocco's information right there. And Danny, we'll see if we can get that dropped into the chat in the comment section so you guys can follow along with Rocco on Instagram. Now, Rocco, I'm gonna get the questions started right here. And for those of you, obviously, if you have questions, get them in. Is your post-processing any different for images that are going to print? Are you editing set differently than you would if it's just going to be something that's going to be viewed digitally?
Absolutely. I mean, the post-processing, the overall look and feel of what I'm trying to say, that doesn't change, because you have, you have your highlight detail, your shadow details, and so on. Okay, but what changes is, I guess, things like sharpening. Okay, extremely important. The sharpening is dictated by what paper the image ends up on. Okay, so one of the worst things you can do is overly sharpen images. So I'll give you an example. Like if you're printing on softer papers, like a heavily textured paper, a little bit more sharpening goes a long way, because those details are further enhanced and they cut through the texture. Whereas opposed to that, if we're printing on, say, a Barada style paper, where the surface is is quite it's quite luster based. Okay, then you don't need a lot of sharpening, because over sharpening will actually shine through, because these papers already exhibit an incredible amount of detail. So any more detail than is necessary is really going to come through. So and really with sharpening, it's something that's visual. You're going to have to experiment. There's no set rule. I mean, larger prints can accept a little bit more sharpening than smaller prints. Smaller prints can look over sharpened really quick. Okay, so the post-processing changes in the way that we sharpen, but also paying particular attention also on the paper itself. And I'll give you an example. Like if I'm printing on overly warm paper, because I want to achieve that nice, beautiful, warm tones through the image, I don't so much change the color, but I do play around with say the white point, because I'm printing say on a lower contrast paper. I will tend to kind of just lift the highlights a little bit more, just to almost make the highlights jump off the page, if you like, even though the rest of the image I want to sort of sit quite back. So playing around with contrast, selected contrast through luminosity masks and so on, is another little technique. Maybe that's another webinar down the track on how we manipulate images for different size of prints. But the overall aesthetics don't change, but the nuances do, because we want to be able to subtly bring those across in print.
Interesting. Yeah, you're right. You could do an entire workshop just on nuances and like you said before, for people to go out and buy a sample pack. And I think that's really, you don't realize how much the wrong paper can screw an image up until you've seen it on the wrong paper. And you see an image, and most of the time we see images printed, they're on the right paper, so we see them beautifully. But if you print the image, the wrong image on a matte paper, for say, and you see all the just muddy shadows and the loss of detail, that you totally get it then.
You do. And, we sort of print for a lot of photographers here. And it's amazing, when they first come in, I want to print on this paper, and you ask them why. Oh, because I've always printed on that paper. Let me suggest something else. And then all of a sudden their entire world is just falls apart, because they just realize that there's more to this than meets the eye. Why didn't I know this? Paper is not just paper. Not every paper will give you what you want. Sometimes it'll give you more if you just allow yourself to explore a little bit. Yeah, discovery packs are great.
Definitely. And we have a double shot question here from Elliot joining us here on Zoom. First, Elliot's asking in regards to medium-sized prints, what paper size do you consider useful for medium-sized prints?
Medium-sized prints, like I said, there's no, I guess, useful. I'll show an example here. I don't know how that's going to come across, but this is an Archival print. Okay. It's heavily textured paper. It's an A4, okay, and I printed one of my Painterly landscapes on it. Okay, now the rebate here on the edge, you can see that is you can see the texture of the paper. Okay, so the texture of the paper, then all of a sudden your eye becomes accustomed to it, and it comes across. So for me, the texture adds to the image itself. Okay, the worst you can do is if you have a really a small image with a lot of texture, and the small image has fine detail, and the texture then gets in the way of those details. But anything sort of an 8x10 or an A4, I think you can take a lot as long as you leave the rebate, and we can see what the paper is doing, and we know that the paper then is part of the story. Okay, very, very important. Even like with a portrait here, and it's a shame we couldn't get the overhead camera working, but with a portrait here, this portrait is printed on BFK, Arch BFK pure white. Okay, now you can't see it here, but the texture here on this size print doesn't actually work. Okay, because I'm seeing the texture, and it becomes through the paper here. I'm seeing the texture on the screen, on the skin, and it dominates. Okay, and that's not good. You don't want the paper to dominate. You want the paper to be the supporting actor. Okay, the picture is the main actor. Okay, so that's the one that you want that to win the Oscar. Supporting actor is the paper, and you want them to win another award, not the award for main actor. Okay, so the Academy Awards of printing. Okay, so once again, it's about, if you are thinking of printing on textured paper, experiment once again on an A4 and see how, if the genre that you're printing is worthy of a texture, because it adds an element of interest, and it's going to be great, or it's going to detract from what you're trying to say. So extremely important factor. No rights, no wrong, purely subjective.
Okay. Now, before we get to Elliot's second question, I did want to jump back in, because it looked like the border you had on those two images was similarly sized. What is your best practices for a border? Because I know that, like anything else, too big of a border or too narrow of a border can throw off how we experience the image.
Yeah. For me, I don't know. It's 3/4 of an inch, I think, border. You just want enough to see what the paper is about. But even like printing, sometimes I'll print square images on not square paper, but A4 paper. So we sort of weight them differently. So they're bottom weight. Okay, so we have the image, this allows me to then, sign the print if I want to down below, but it just gives the image just enough room to breathe. Okay, and the other consideration also is whether you're matting these for framing as well. Like if I mat one of these prints, I like to leave at least maybe 1/4 of an inch before the mat actually starts, so you can actually appreciate the base color of the paper, and using a matte color that works with the paper. Like, I'll give you an example. If you use a really warm matte color on a bright paper, the paper will actually look brighter and look bluer than what it actually is. So this is why a lot of the times I don't actually have mattes around my prints. I'm just going to get Tanya to bring out a really large print that I've just printed the other day for a client. And it's actually the one that that appears in the I'll show you what I mean. So we have a large print here. Okay, you can see the large print. This is a 2-inch border. Now the frame will sit on the edge of this. Okay, there is no other mat around it. Okay, now if I want to then go bigger again, because in the frame, I make that difference up and would print, say, on instead of a 44-inch printer, I would print it, say, on the 64-inch printer, okay, and go bigger again, okay? But for me, anything that interferes with what the paper is actually saying is not a good thing. So I'm a purist when it comes to that. So borders are relative to what, you know, to the size of the print as well. So this is a 2-inch. Sometimes I've done as big as 4-inch borders, leaving a little bit more room, you know, on the bottom, if you like. But yeah, so that's how it works. We're going to put that back without creasing it.
That's beautiful there. Now, yeah. Elliot was asking as well, do you use archival sprays on images printed on matte paper, which are not mounted behind glass?
I never do anything that's not mounted behind glass. And with archival sprays, yeah, the paper's already archival. The paper and ink combination is already archival. So I don't really put anything on the prints themselves. There are sprays you can get. I think there's a brand, I'm not sure what it is, whether it's Golden brand, where you can actually spray, you know, and protect the print, so from touchy things. And I know that a few artists that we've printed exhibitions for have gone down the road of spraying them, but they sprayed them themselves. Something I won't do is spray a print. There's just, yeah, I just like to leave them as they are. But you can definitely spray them. I think the brand that, I don't know, I think it's Golden brand. Does that ring a bell? Golden brand they used. It's called Golden, I think. Yeah. So yeah. So, but you guys sell sprays and stuff. There's a lot on the market that are, you got to make sure they are archival though, if you are going to spray, because yeah, otherwise all that hard work just goes out the window.
Definitely. Anytime you're messing with a print, whether it's a spray, if you do it the wrong way or it's the wrong,
especially when you're messing with a large print, it's expensive. That's a lot of paper and that's a lot of ink. It's a lot of heartache.
oh, it is. And that's another thing. When you print on your own, you realize how expensive printing is, because it's not like you're sending it off to a lab and you just get this nice print in the mail. It's like, no, you print one and then, okay, this is off. I got to redo this, or this is off. And you all these little corrections, and you have to, I'm doing my tests on the same paper I'm printing on. So
yeah, absolutely.
That's why we get people like you on, Rocco, to kind of lower.
Yeah.
If I can lower
at the end of the day, the only reason why you do sort of like, if I'm printing like a really large print like that, I would do sort of a, you know, an A4 version of it first to make sure that it looks the way it's meant to look on the same paper, and then we'll go and print large. But really, if your color management system is working properly, you know, your profiles, your calibration, and everything is set in stone, you shouldn't have the heartache of reprinting because the image just doesn't quite look right. Okay, the only time you reprint is because aesthetically you might want to change something, or you realize that maybe that's not the paper that you should be printing on. Okay, so once again, it comes down to aesthetics, but really, you know, with today's technology, beautiful monitors, calibration devices, the ability to create, you know, custom profiling for printers and so on and so forth, you shouldn't be getting huge variances in what you're seeing. So, but I know that not everyone, you know, pays that particular amount of respect to the color management aspect. Why? Because it's not a sexy subject. People hate color management. Oh, color management is boring. It is the most boring subject in photography, but it's one of the most essentials if you want to produce nice pieces of art like this one. So there you go.
Definitely. Now, our final question here coming to us from LC, joining us on Vimeo, saying, sometimes my papers get mixed up and I can't tell which side is the print side. Is it always the more textured side? How do I sort this out?
Okay, this is how I do it. So you dry your lips, okay, and then you bite your lips, and the side that it sticks to is the side that you print on.
Oh, nice.
Okay, so sticking to the top. So yeah, that's the side you print on. It's not always the most textured side, but also when you take them out of never take them out of their plastic bag, because you'll always get print side up. Okay, so the paper's already packaged with print side up. So what I carefully do, and mind you, handling prints, I use latex gloves. Okay, so latex gloves, very, very important. Unpowdered, not powdered ones. You just pull one sheet out at a time. The latex gloves are great because they have a little bit of grip without leaving your oils onto the paper. And it's a really cheap, inexpensive way of doing things. And once I'm done with them, I just throw them out. You just buy a box of them. They're fairly inexpensive. Yeah, never take them out of their enclosing plastic sleeves when it says print face up. So because you want to protect them from the elements of the environment, whether it's moisture or heat or whatever else. So you want to be able to keep them in the box and keep them nicely packaged, and pull out one sheet as required, and then print. Okay, but if you don't know which one, then you just bite them. Yeah, chew on a bit of paper and see how you go. Yeah.
That's great. Well, Rocco, this was like a comprehensive breakdown. And every once in a while we get to do a workshop where we think we've seen it all, and I still learn. I think I learned about 5 new things today. So huge thank you to you for imparting your wisdom and knowledge and experience on us. And I want to send also a huge thank you to the team at Canson Infinity, the rest of Rocco's team back there behind the scenes, making sure to get this all set up. And a huge thank you to Elliot right there, says thanks, Rocco and Derek, and the rest of our viewers who have tuned in, gotten their questions in. But Rocco, any closing words?
No, not really. I mean, like I said, the printing is the last piece of the jigsaw puzzle, and I think printing is extremely rewarding. If it's rewarding when you start doing it correctly and you understand the process. But really, it's about experimenting. That's what art is. I mean, art is all about trying different things and pushing your creative envelope in different directions. And getting yourself a printer and getting yourself some paper. It's going to change the way you photograph. It's going to start changing the way you look at the world as well. So I strongly recommend that you get out there and experience the beautiful world of paper and the beautiful world of printing. So keep creating, guys.
Wonderful. Well, huge thank you again to Rocco and his team and the Canson Infinity team. But that's it. That's all we have for you today. Another rendition of the B&H virtual event space is in the books. Catch y'all next time.